Hello, today we're going to be looking at lesson 1-3, properties of real numbers. Today's learning target is, I can apply the properties of numbers by identifying the property used in a mathematical statement. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going over these properties, and then you're going to be doing a handout where you actually figure out which property is being used. You should have seen this in middle school or saw the big idea of this. The first property we're going to look at is the commutative property of addition or multiplication. So we have some addition examples and we have some multiplication examples. So the first thing is the commutative property specifically states that the order of values does not matter. So basically, when you're doing the commutative property, you're just changing the order. And one way I know this is because if I look, the first two letters of commutative are C and an O, so I'm changing the order. So some examples of the commutative property are A plus B is simply just the same thing as B plus A. I could also say 2 plus 3 is the same thing as 3 plus 2. Now, this works on addition and multiplication, so I could do the exact same thing. I can say A times B equals B times A. I can also say 5 times 4 is the same as 4 times 5. And those are examples of the commutative property. I'm just simply changing the order. So what came first comes last, what came second comes first. We have the associative property of addition or multiplication. So in this one, the associative property basically thinks of this in terms of groupings. So how I group things. So grouping of values does not matter. So when we say grouping, it's going to be written the exact same order each and every single time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just do A, B, and C. So A plus B plus C is the same as A plus B plus C. But there's going to be a slight difference. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. In my A plus B plus C right here, I'm going to put a parentheses around my A and my B. But in my second example, I'm going to put a parentheses around B and C. So I'm simply just lifting up my parentheses and moving them over. If I was doing this on an example with numbers, I can say 5 plus 1 plus 3 is the same as 5 plus 1 plus 3. But I'm going to put parentheses around my 5 and my 1 this time, and then do my 1 and my 3. And the exact same thing works with multiplication. So I can actually do this with multiplication. So I can say A times B times C is the same as A times B times C. And now let's do some parentheses. So parentheses around A and B, and then a parentheses around B and C. So you can also do like 2 times 4 times 7. Same thing as 2 times 4 times 7. And then just put parentheses around the first two. And put parentheses around the last two. And that's an example of the associative property. So think of it as associates, like 2 and 4 are associates, but now 4 and 7 are associates. The identity property of addition or multiplication. All you need to know about the identity property is that it means it stays the same. Your identity is not changing. Stays the same. So when you have this, you're basically saying, I can do A plus 0. So I can say A plus 0 equals A. I could also say A times 1 is equal to A. So basically, I can do the identity property of addition, where I add 0, or I can do the identity property of multiplication, where I just multiply times 1. The inverse property of addition or multiplication. So when I have this, I'm simply using the opposite to cancel out a value. So I have a few examples. So I can have the additive inverse or the multiplicative inverse. So additive inverse or multiplicative inverse. So some examples of the additive inverse are simply you're just using the opposite to cancel out a value. So if I give you, say, the number 6, the opposite of a 6 is a -6, and that's equal to 0. If I wanted to, I can also say like 3 plus -3 is equal to 0. Or I could just even do this with variables like x plus -x is equal to 0. So I'm always going to add up to 0. If I want to do the multiplicative inverse, the way that works is if I have, say, like a fraction, so like 1/3, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it and get 3 over 1, multiply it, and I'm going to get that equal to 1. So if I have, like, say, 5, I have 5 over 1, multiply that by 1 over 5, and that's equal to 1. So if I want to do variables, I can say a times 1 over a is equal to 1. So you're always going to be multiplying to 1. Property of 0. It's basically the zero product property. Multiplying by 0 always equals 0. So every time I multiply by 0, I'm going to get 0. So I have 17 times 0 equals 0. 6 times 0 is equal to 0. A times 0 is equal to 0. X times 0 is equal to 0. 1 over a times 0 is 0. So I have a bunch of different examples I could come up with. The distributive property simply says multiply a value. Multiply a value. Let me just change my marker. Multiply a value to an expression inside parentheses. So here's how it's going to work. If I have an a times b plus c, I'm going to distribute that a to each term on the inside. So I'm going to have a times b plus a times c. If I have an example like 2 times x plus 7, I can simplify that by distributing my 2 to my x and my 2 to my 7. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 7 is 14. And that's an example of the distributive property. So if you have any questions, please email myself or Ms. Townsend, but it's important that we memorize these because these will be popping up over the course of the year. Have a great day.